Okay, in this unit we're going to talk about manure management. Manure management is part of any livestock operation nowadays. We're really going to talk about Iowa's laws and Iowa's regulations. For those of you from other states, particularly Minnesota and Wisconsin, they're very similar. They may use different software, different programs to go up with it, but we're going to work with Iowa, obviously, because we're based in Iowa rather than doing all three states. So with that, as we look at manure management, there are certain requirements as far as size of operations, and once you're so large, then you do have to have a plan. If you're not that large, then it's not required you have a plan, but it's still a good idea to manage your manure properly and use it. It's something historically was kind of ignored. Manure is just something to get rid of from your livestock. But with the price of fertilizers recently, manure's got a lot more attention. It's a very good nutrient source. You don't have control over a whole lot what's in it. You have to put on whatever's there, but it is a very valuable source, and we'll do some things related to that as we work through this thing. First thing I want to go to is, at least for Iowa, is they have the IMACC homepage. I provide a link there in my course content for you on this. It may look a little different than this, obviously. At the time I taped this is what the homepage kind of looked like. But that's IMACC homepage. There's a lot of good references there. Iowa Manure Management Action Group. A lot of good materials there for manure management in Iowa. It's maintained by Iowa State Extension University. And much of the stuff I've got here is from their website. First step in manure management is actually determining your nutrient contents. The best method is really to have it analyzed. Best time to analyze is basically at the time of application. You see a picture here of a guy actually pulling a sample out of the tank. You filled the tank, you pull the sample out of the tank and send it in. I would recommend for manure management to do it probably once a year for the first 3 years. If those first 3 years the results are coming back fairly consistent, then probably you don't need to analyze it very often anymore after that, unless obviously something changes about your livestock operation, whether it be the way you feed them, the number of livestock, the facilities, how much water gets into the waste, all kinds of things there. Before you take an analysis, make sure you completely agitate it, and that's why sometimes it works best to just take it right out of the tank. You may want to freeze the sample before you send it in, just less chance of it ending up all over somebody's package as we look at it. Other ways of sampling, lagoons are not as common as they used to be, but you can see what the person here has for a lagoon is basically a very long PCV pipe. They stick that long in there, and then there's a cork rubber stopper in the upper right hand corner there that they pull tight in that, pull it out, and then run that into their bucket. Even in a feedlot you can sample, and again you want a fairly consistent sample for that whole lot. You can see what the farmer done here. He's just basically made a trail here, and he's going to go and scoop up that trail and then take a sample out of that trail as he's looked at it. So important part of sampling is try to get something that's consistent and average for that operation. Okay, don't just pull from one small location that may be different than other parts. There are a lot of labs out there that will manure test. Actually, many of the soil testing labs, most of the soil testing labs will also run a manure test. Again, the IMACC site does keep an up-to-date list, at least in the Midwest here, of labs that are willing to make manure sample tests. Cost isn't that expensive to get really some good information on what you're working with. If you don't have actual sample results, for example, you're going to have to do a manure management plan for your own farm operation, for your crop management plan. You can use these standard tables for the livestock that you've put your scenario for, but if you actually have manure sampling results, that is best. For the assignment, we're going to actually use some actual results from a couple of years ago here from the college's farm. But there is an Appendix A that comes with manure management plans that does have some basic standard figures. The standard figures are far from correct. They're just the best guess is what they amount to. The other thing that will come in Appendix A is actually determining the total nutrient production. I have a worksheet for you, and we're just going to, by the way, go through this whole video today and not stop for the worksheets. I'm just going to explain the worksheets. We'll go through them. Most of them are pretty straightforward or explained in other places. So with that, your first worksheet, your first assignment is going to go in and determine manure production. There is an appendix, and the appendix I make available for you in that worksheet that actually tells you how much manure is produced, and you're going to work through a problem and determine in a dairy situation how much manure is produced and actually how much that manure is worth. The prices I provided are approximate, may not be current, but they're close to what fertilizers are worth. And It's kind of interesting when you're done. You find out, wow, that's how much money I really have in value in my manure. There is some value there. So that's your first assignment. You can pause this video if you want to come back to it later and go and do that, or go ahead and watch the rest of the video and come back and do the assignments when we're done watching the video. So, who needs manure management plans? Well, an operation that has an animal unit capacity of more than 5,000 animal units that was constructed or expanded after 1985. So if you were a big operation before 1985, you're still not mandated to have a manure management plan. Not too many operations like that left over. That's kind of what we call the grandfather clause. We're not going to penalize people who already built it and the new law comes out. But most of our operations have been built or expanded. That doesn't include expansion, okay? I mean, you make any change in your operation and you're over 5 animal units, then you are counted. The operation proposes to construct a manure management structure will have an animal unit capacity of more than 500 units, or a person applies manure from a confinement operation located outside of Iowa, in Iowa. Does not apply if the operation's capacity is 500 units. So, for those of you in Minnesota, if you have a 500 animal unit capacity place and you're hauling manure into Iowa, you're required to have an Iowa manure management plan. Okay, and that's something some people aren't aware of. Again, if you're less than that 500 animal units. Now, what is an animal unit? Well, we worked with the animal units when we did our pasture activity and our forage species. It's very similar for manure management, and this is the standard that they use as we work through it for manure management. For many of you who are dairy farmers, a mature dairy cow is considered 1.4. So we're looking at, I think if I do the math right, 500 divided by 1.4 is going to be about 358 or 360, somewhere in there, actual cows or animal units. And that means those that are confined, okay? And what's the definition of confined? Well, they're not let outside. So if you're in a dairy operation where your animals are only in the barn for feeding and maybe nighttime sleeping, and then they wander out to pasture the rest of the time, you're not a confined animal unit. But keep in mind, this animal unit also counts your heifers, your dry cows, your calves, if they are confined and not on pasture. So if we look at the Dairy Foundation farm here, we're expanding this, and you're going to do a matrix here in a little bit with that expansion activity. But we're expanding this operation right now, so we have to, as we expand, make the capacity less than that 358 animals, okay? And that is where we're designed at. We're right at the maximum numbers because we don't want to go into that situation where we have other issues we have to deal with. Even though we are, as a dairy operation here at the college, following all that, those practices, we are doing best management practices. The regulations causes more issues, and a lot of people like to stay under them. Now keep in mind, these may change in the future, and they may even regulate smaller operations. At this point, we're at the 500 animal units. So, for manure management plan, there are forms, and again, we're going to work with the Iowa form at the IMAG site. They have the forms for you. I provided them for you in the assignment. There are several ways of doing this form. One is a Word document, but they also have an Excel document, and that's what we're going to use in this class because the Excel document does a lot of their calculations for you as you work with it. But this is the cover page for it. Give you some basic instructions. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. The first page you're going to work with on the worksheet, and then for your own crop management plan for your farm is this page here. This is basically facility information, manure and nutrient production information. Again, this is available in Excel. For the class assignment, just some basic information for your own farm operation. Try to fill out as much as you can here. I know some of this stuff you aren't going to be able to fill on this front page. You definitely need to fill out the bottom part there, and that's explained in the assignment how to fill that out. As you go through the spreadsheet, they do have footnotes, and you'll notice, for example, here under column 4, N has a footnote C on it. If you can see this, as you work with Excel, you'll see that. There's also a document that deals with the footnotes. In fact, the Word document for the form has the footnotes. The Excel doesn't have the footnotes in it, but those footnotes do a very good job of explaining what needs to go in there. So if you don't understand from my instructions what needs to go in there, just refer to the footnotes. They're very well done. They've done a good job of putting this together so that people can figure it out. It's complicated enough, yes, but they provide a lot of instruction if you're just willing to read and look for it. So whenever you see a little small letter next to something, If you're not sure what they're talking about, then go to the footnotes, and they do explain what they want entered in that area. And that's throughout the forms as you look at it. The second page of the form, again, this is the Word document, but there's also an Excel, which you're going to be working with, is your manure application rates. And commercial fertilizer rates, if you're putting anything on. You need to, with this, it's going to determine how much manure, how many gallons in case of liquid manure, which is what we're doing for our class assignment. There are separate tabs on the bottom of that spreadsheet, and hopefully you're familiar with tabs on a spreadsheet. On the bottom of the spreadsheet, there's separate tabs. There's a separate group of tabs for dry manure. So if you're using dry manure in your own crop farm when you're doing this assignment for your crop management plan, use the dry manure tabs, ignore the liquid manure tabs. If you're doing liquid manure, we can ignore the dry manure. If you're doing both, then you have to fill out both for that matter as we look at it. So this is the second sheet that you'll be filling out. Again, the instructions are provided as you work with the assignment. And then the third page is where is the manure going. And this is by crop years. For our class, I'm only going to require you to do one crop for the assignment, and for your crop management plan, I'm only going to require you to do one crop also. As you work through that, what you would have to do is duplicate this sheet or copy and paste this sheet for additional crop years. So you can do one crop year this coming year, but if you're doing a full manure management plan, you would obviously duplicate this sheet several times and put a different crop year on top. The important part about this page is when we come down to the bottom there, in the bottom right hand corner, it'll total up the manure that's been applied. That total manure applied needs to be the same or more, basically, than the manure on the first page that your animals are producing. Okay, that's what the plan is. And if you come up with this and you're short of fields, then you have to find either rented land or sign an agreement with an adjoining farmer that they will take your manure. You can't just have something verbally said, yeah, I might be interested in buying your manure and taking it on my farm. They have to have a signed agreement that they will take your manure as you submit this plan if you're mandated to have a plan. Other things that are required attachments is a plat map. In other words, where is your farm located? We've already done that for your crop management plan. Aerial photos, including showing your fields. How did you document your optimum yield for this farm? Because one of the things you have to put in on this manure management plan is what yield you're expecting. And again, what we try to do is using the web soil survey, and I realize that may not be currently working. Otherwise, you can say I'm using county average yield. So those are your choices there for optimum yield calculations. We talked about realistic yield expectations. And then your manure sampling results, or did you use standard tables? Other required attachments is if you are shipping manure somewhere else other than your farm, then you have to have agreements from the people that that manure is going to. You also have to do a P-index report. We've talked about P-index. You've worked through that already for all your fields. That's also part of the required manure management plan that needs to be submitted separately. And then you need to document compliance with any irrigated manure application restrictions. Most of us are not dealing with irrigated manure, so I'm not going to spend any time on that. But that is another aspect that we would look at. There is an annual compliance fee form. Once you have a manure management plan, this is something you have to fill out every year and send in. It goes in with some money. This money goes into a fund that basically is designed to help clean up manure spills or manure problems within the state. Anybody who has a manure management plan who's a large confinement feeding operation has to fill this out every year and send it in as they update their plans. One of the things to keep in mind as you apply manure, and again, if you're applying manure, you're probably required to have a license, or at least if you're a custom operator or a manure applicator. You do have to be licensed nowadays. Some of the licensing requirements, there's a lot of information and training there. Similar to pesticide application licensing. We're not going to go into that aspect for this class, but that is something to follow and work with. But one of the things you need to be aware of when you're applying manure is there is some separation distances. For dry manure, it's not a big deal with public use buildings. For liquid manure, it is. If you're applying liquid manure and you're just spraying it on top of the field and you're not incorporating it within 24 hours, then you need to stay at least 750 feet away from any residence, any church, business, school, public use area. In other words, anything that's not yours, you have to stay at least 750 feet away as a way to take that. So you may not be able to spread right to the edge of your field as you look at that. Other separation distances, abandoned wells, sinkholes, high quality water resources, ag drainage wells, That's provided there in that second table. If any of those situations are pertinent and apply to your farm operation, there are separation distances on those also as we look at them. So your assignment, as we've talked about this, is to fill out a manure management spreadsheet for the dairy center.